At ISO 230, 4 Iranian one-way attack drones lifted off from the southern coast and turned north toward the busiest oil choke point on the planet. They were running for the tankers, the shipping lanes, the maritime corridors that move a fifth of the world's crude oil through a passage 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. The drones never arrived. Every single one of them was intercepted over open water before it reached a ship, a sailor, or a cargo hold, and before the crews that launched them had finished logging the engagement. American drones and fighter jets were already crossing the Iranian coast in the opposite direction, going for the radar installations and communications towers that had been watching the strait from the shore, enabling every attack the IRGC had attempted against commercial shipping in the weeks preceding. The eyes and ears of the regime, the coastal surveillance infrastructure that gave IRGC operators their picture of every vessel attempting to transit, went dark in a coordinated strike that preceded Iran's own missile counter-response before that response had even been organized. 0 American casualties. 6 of Iran's 7 retaliatory ballistic missiles became debris over the Gulf or scrap on the desert floor. The 7th malfunctioned without an interceptor needing to touch it. Iran claimed it had cratered the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. CENTCOM confirmed the claim was false. This is not what a stalemate looks like. This is what a slow, deliberate subtraction looks like when it has been running long enough that the pattern itself becomes the verdict. But let us back all the way up. Because to understand what this early morning engagement in the Strait revealed, you need to understand the exchange pattern that has been running consistently across this conflict. And why the consistency of that pattern, not any individual engagement within it, is the real analytical story. The IRGC's strategic theory entering this conflict was built on a specific economic premise. The theory holds that the persistent application of enough military harassment, enough drone launches, enough ballistic missile salvos, enough commercial shipping interdictions, enough sustained threat to Gulf partner nations, will eventually raise the political cost of American persistence above the cost of a negotiated outcome that gives the regime what it actually needs. The regime needs approximately $24 billion in frozen foreign assets unlocked. It needs the sanctions pressure that has been bleeding the Iranian economy for years reduced before the economic damage reaches the structural threshold that the IRGC's operational capability cannot be sustained through. Every drone launched, every missile fired, every tanker turned back, every shipping lane disruption. In the IRGC's strategic theory, each of these is a bargaining chip wearing a warhead, a calculated signal designed to make the political cost of Washington saying no to the regime's negotiating demands higher than the cost of paying up. The problem with the theory is the exchange ratio. Every bargaining chip is supposed to impose a cost on the United States and on the global economic system that is higher than the cost of the chip to Iran. But if the chip costs Iran $100,000 to produce and deliver, and the United States intercepts it for $10,000 while simultaneously destroying the radar installation that will be needed to support the next chip, the chip has not imposed a net cost on Washington. It has imposed a net cost on Tehran. The chip has been swept off the board before it could be cached, the radar that helped launch it is gone, and the regime is left having spent something irreplaceable against a defensive architecture that is now confirmed to be operating on the right side of the cost curve. This is the operational verdict of the pattern that has been running across this conflict. Not one morning's exchange, but the cumulative weight of every exchange that has followed the same structure. Iran launches, the U.S. intercepts, the U.S. strikes back at the infrastructure that supported the launch. Iran issues a victory statement. The operational record shows no American casualties and no meaningful damage to U.S. positions. The regime's surveillance network has been going dark, one radar node at a time, for the entirety of this conflict. The defensive architecture doing the intercepting has not been running down its expensive inventory on cheap threats. It has been doing the opposite. The confirmed sequence of events is specific and public through CENTCOM's own statements. U.S. forces intercepted 4 Iranian one-way attack drones before they reached commercial shipping in the Strait. U.S. forces then struck Iranian coastal surveillance radar sites at Goureh and Qeshm Island and the communications tower at Sirik Island in response. Hours later, Iran fired 7 ballistic missiles at targets in Bahrain and Kuwait. 6 were intercepted. The 7th malfunctioned and landed in the desert without reaching its target. CENTCOM confirmed 0 casualties and 0 verified damage to U.S. or partner facilities. Iran's official response included a senior advisor to the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, appearing on camera to state that Iran's missiles are unlimited while America's THAAD system is exhausted. Read that claim carefully. The same week, 6 of those unlimited missiles became Gulf debris, and the 7th defeated itself without requiring any interceptor. Iran's senior leadership advisor is publicly telling the President of the United States that the interceptor inventory is exhausted. This tells you something about the information environment that the regime's leadership is operating inside, And the implications of that information environment for how the IRGC is interpreting what 99 days of consistent exchange outcomes should be telling it about the trajectory of this conflict. If the advisor genuinely believes the THAAD exhaustion claim, then the Iranian command is operating on a threat assessment that is structurally disconnected from the operational record. The interceptors that killed 6 of 7 ballistic missiles in a single engagement do not come from an exhausted system. They come from a tiered defensive architecture that has specifically solved the cheap drone problem with cheap weapons. Precisely so that the expensive interceptors can be reserved for the ballistic missile tier where they are actually needed. If Iran's leadership cannot see the difference between a system that has sorted its interceptor inventory by threat tier and a system that is running low, then it cannot accurately assess what the next several months of exchanges are going to look like. And an institution making operational decisions based on a threat assessment, this disconnected from operational reality, will make increasingly poor decisions, as the compounding costs of those poor decisions accumulate. The architecture that produced this morning's results was built layer by layer, and each layer tells a different part of the strategic story. The first and foundational layer is the one that never makes headlines. Nothing moves in the Strait of Hormuz without American sensors seeing it. A Navy P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft maintains persistent orbit above the strait, stitching together the maritime surface picture, the locations, courses, speeds, and classifications of every surface contact in the operational area. MQ-9 Reapers extend the coverage over the coastal launch sites and inland positions, watching for the preparation signatures and launch activities that precede an IRGC drone or missile attack. Aegis-class destroyers light the sky above the strait with their SPY series radar systems, providing airborne tracking data on everything that crosses into their detection envelope. Satellites provide strategic warning from above, watching the launch sites at intervals that leave the IRGC with no preparation activity that goes unobserved for long. The information from all of these sensors does not sit in separate databases on separate platforms. It flows into a fused, correlated, real-time operational picture shared across every U.S. platform in the theater simultaneously. An Iranian drone that clears the coastline after launch is already plotted, already tracked, already in the engagement queue of the U.S. defensive system before the operator on the Iranian side has confirmed the weapon is on its intended heading. The sensor-to-shooter chain, the sequence from first detection to engagement authorization to weapons release against the identified target, has been refined through months of operational repetition in this specific environment. The decision points have been pre-established. The authorization protocols are optimized. The intercept does not wait for the threat to approach the shipping lane. The intercept happens over the launch area because the detection happened before the launch was completed. This is why 4 drones were destroyed over open water rather than near the vessels they were targeting. The drones were killed while the distance between them and the shipping lanes was still measured in miles because the tracking chain had plotted their courses and calculated their intercept geometry before they were even clear of the coast. The second layer is electronic warfare and air superiority. The EA-18G Growler, operating ahead of or alongside the strike package, executes the electromagnetic preparation of the operational environment before any kinetic engagement begins. The Growler carries the AN/ALQ-99 jamming system and AGM-88 HARM missiles. It finds the frequencies that Iran's integrated radar and communications network depends on, and either floods them with noise until the Iranian operator's screen goes from data to static. The disruption so complete that it does not dim the display but whites it out entirely, overwhelmed rather than simply absent. Or it uses the radar emission itself as a targeting signal for the harm, riding the beam back to the antenna and destroying the emitter at the source. The air superiority provided by F-35C and F-15E platforms above ensures that the Iranian air defense network cannot contest the Growler's freedom to maneuver and jam across the frequencies it is targeting. The result, inside an Iranian radar and command facility during an active engagement while the Growler is operating, is that the defensive picture the facility should be building is replaced by noise. The operators cannot see the incoming U.S. aircraft, cannot see the U.S. drones, cannot track the weapons that are about to arrive at their installation. The U.S. side, drawing from the sensor fusion picture maintained by P-8 Poseidons, MQ-9 Reapers, Aegis SPY radar, and satellite coverage, operates with a complete and current picture of the engagement. The Iranian side operates with static. That is not a marginal informational advantage. It is the removal of the information on which a coherent defense depends, applied at the moment the defensive response is most urgently needed. The third layer is where the strategic reversal of this campaign has been most directly stated. For years, through every conflict in which cheap drones appeared as a significant threat, the persistent analytical criticism of American air defense economics was built on a single uncomfortable observation. It is not sustainable to spend $2 million to intercept a $50,000 drone. An adversary that manufactures cheap threats faster than the defender can manufacture expensive interceptors wins the economic war, even while losing every tactical engagement. This was not a theoretical concern applied to an imaginary future conflict. It was an observed pattern in multiple recent theaters where drone costs and interceptor costs diverged in the attacker's favor. The question of whether the United States could stay on the right side of the cost curve against a sustained drone swarm campaign was genuinely unresolved entering this conflict. The operational record of this campaign has provided the answer. The CENTCOM commander stated it directly and publicly. The United States has gotten on the right side of the cost curve, downing $100,000 drones with $10,000 weapons. That statement, made by the theater commander about an active ongoing operation, is not a press release talking point. It is the operational confirmation from the senior officer accountable for the campaign's execution that the cost asymmetry problem, the problem that has made drone warfare so analytically troubling as an asymmetric tool, has been solved in this theater. The solution is the APKWS, the Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System. A laser-guided 70mm rocket produced at approximately $35,000 per round that converts the standard unguided 70mm rocket, already in U.S. military inventories for decades, into a precision-guided munition by adding a laser seeker to the existing rocket body. The economics of this approach are as important as the technology. The unguided 70mm rocket is a mature, high-production munition with a supply chain and manufacturing infrastructure already established. Adding precision guidance to an existing high-volume munition costs dramatically less than designing a dedicated precision weapon from scratch. The result is a precision-guided weapon available at a cost that is a fraction of the Shahed drone's production cost. And against a platform that flies slow, flies at low altitude, navigates without evasive maneuvering capability, and uses an engine of comparable complexity to a lawnmower motor, the APKWS is both economically and kinetically dominant. A single F-15E loaded for a drone-killing mission can carry up to 30 APKWS rockets, 30 engagements at $35,000 each, against targets that cost the IRGC $100,000 or more per unit to produce, deliver, and expend. The cost ratio in every individual engagement runs in the defender's favor, and it compounds across every engagement in a sustained campaign. Below the APKWS layer, the Phalanx close-in weapon system provides the last defensive barrier, a 20mm Gatling gun installed on surface combatants that fires at the rate needed to saturate the engagement geometry around any drone-sized target that survives the aircraft-delivered intercept layer. And below the Phalanx, directed energy. Shipboard laser systems that take down drone-sized targets at the cost of the electricity required to sustain the beam. The per-engagement cost of a directed energy kill approaches zero in terms of any expendable munition inventory, because it expends electricity rather than rounds. The cost curve does not just favor the defense in the APKWS tier, it reaches a floor of near zero in the directed energy tier. The fourth layer reserves the expensive interceptors for the threat that warrants them. The SM-2 missile family from Aegis destroyers, the Patriot's PC-3 batteries, and the THAAD system at high altitude exist for ballistic missiles, threats that move at terminal velocities on trajectories that require specialized kinetic intercept solutions, rather than the guided rockets and guns that address the drone tier. When Iran fired 7 ballistic missiles at Bahrain and Kuwait, those systems were the appropriate response. SM-2 interceptors can cost over $2 million per round, but they are matched to a threat that costs Iran millions per missile to produce, and that carries the kinetic potential to kill Americans and partner force personnel at U.S. military installations. The triage of the defensive response by threat tier is not evidence of THAAD exhaustion. It is evidence of exactly the right defensive resource management. Cheap weapons for cheap threats, expensive weapons for expensive threats, with the architecture designed so that the expensive layer is never wasted on targets the cheaper layers can handle. The fourth layer is where the expensive rounds are correctly deployed, against the ballistic missile tier. Iran's ballistic missiles, the Shahab series, the solid fuel intermediate range variants that the IRGC has been firing at Gulf state targets, cost millions of dollars each to produce and represent a fundamentally different threat category than the Shahed drone, both in kinetic potential and in the physics of the intercept problem. A ballistic missile at altitude in the boost or terminal phase requires an interceptor with the speed, accuracy, and kinetic energy to defeat a target moving at ballistic velocities on a predictable trajectory. The SM-2 missile family from Aegis destroyers, the Patriot PAC-3 battery, and the THAAD system at high altitude are the correct responses to this threat tier. They are expensive. SM-2 interceptors can run over $2 million per round. But they are matched to the threat tier that warrants them. They are not being expended against Shahed drones that the APKWS and Phalanx layers are handling at a fraction of the cost. The triage of the intercept response by threat tier is not evidence of THAAD exhaustion. It is evidence of precisely the right defensive management, saving the expensive rounds for the threats that require them by handling the cheaper threats with cheaper weapons. The fifth and final layer is the punchback that the entire preceding architecture enables. Having intercepted the drones with cheap weapons, having degraded Iran's defensive picture with the Growler, having cleared the threat environment sufficiently to operate with freedom over Iranian coastal installations, U.S. forces struck the radar sites and communications infrastructure that made the Iranian offensive action possible. The coastal surveillance radar at Goureh went dark. The installations on Qeshm Island were struck. The communications tower at Sirik Island was destroyed. The Lucas drone, an American one-way attack platform operating in coordination with F-15E, F-18, and F-35 aircraft, was likely among the weapons used based on what Iran's own communications described as a projectile striking the island positions. The Lucas takes the same operational concept as the Shahed, one-way, autonomous, expendable, cheap relative to what it destroys, and applies more advanced swarm coordination and targeting capability against the radar installations that enable Iranian offensive operations. The American Shahed deployed against the infrastructure that supported the launch of the Iranian Shahed. The punchback closes the loop in a way that matters beyond the tactical result. The Iranian radar network that went dark this morning is not just a destroyed piece of infrastructure, it is a reduced capability to execute the next exchange in the pattern. Every node in the surveillance architecture that goes dark in the punchback layer narrows the IRGC's picture of the strait, reduces its targeting fidelity for the next drone or missile salvo, and forces it to operate from a progressively degraded understanding of the environment it is trying to threaten. The subtraction is cumulative. The next exchange will be launched from a more limited surveillance picture than the one that existed this morning. 3 pressure tracks converge through this operational pattern, and it is their simultaneous operation that constitutes the strategic pressure on the IRGC. The military track is the daily record of the subtraction. Drones that do not return because they were destroyed before reaching their targets. Ballistic missiles that become debris because they were intercepted by a tiered defense that correctly allocated expensive interceptors to expensive threats. Radar nodes that go dark because the punchback layer specifically targets the sensors that support the next launch. The IRGC is not losing individual engagements in isolation. It is spending down a military capacity that the Iranian defense industrial base, already constrained by sanctions limiting its access to components and manufacturing technology, cannot replace at the rate the campaign is consuming it. The economic track runs at a scale that the tactical military exchange does not capture. The blockade that has been in effect across this conflict has been stopping approximately $500 million per day from flowing through the Iranian economy via the Strait's commercial shipping channels. Every day the blockade continues, every day the commercial transit picture stays compressed from its normal volume, is a day the Iranian government's access to the foreign currency and economic activity it needs to sustain its operations is reduced. Against a regime that is simultaneously trying to unlock $24 billion in frozen foreign assets to prevent its economy from collapsing, the $500 million daily blockade impact is the compressing of a timeline the regime is racing against. The psychological track is the one that the advisor's public statement reveals most completely. The claim of unlimited Iranian missiles and exhausted American THAAD is not a statement of operational reality. It is a statement of institutional need. The need to present a picture to the Iranian domestic audience, to the regime's regional partners, and to the international community that Iran is not losing. But the gap between the claimed picture and the operational record is visible to every analyst, every intelligence service, and every commercial shipping operator who has been watching the engagement record for 99 days. Iran launches. America intercepts. America strikes back. Iran claims victory. The radar goes dark and stays dark. The honest assessment is not that this conflict is at a stalemate. A stalemate exists when neither side can impose meaningful cost on the other. What the operational record shows is one side consistently spending irreplaceable military capacity, one radar node at a time and one Shahed drone at a time, and getting nothing measurable in return against a defensive architecture that is now confirmed to be on the right side of the cost curve. At 0230, 4 drones cleared the Iranian coast. The tracks were already plotted on American screens before they were over open water. The sensor-to-shooter chain was running before the drones had finished their launch profile. The intercept happened over the strait, not at the shipping lanes, because the detection happened before the launch was complete. The radar at Goureh that helped enable the launch is dark. The tower at Sirik is gone. The 7 ballistic missiles that followed are debris or desert scrap. The advisor who said THAAD is exhausted made that claim the same morning that 6 of Iran's unlimited missiles demonstrated what exhausted looks like from the inside. The cost curve has been reversed, the subtraction is running, and the chips keep getting swept off the board before the regime can cash them. The question the 99th day of this pattern raises is not whether the subtraction is occurring. The operational record answers that. The question is whether the institution making decisions inside the information environment that produces unlimited missiles, exhausted THAAD, as a public statement will recognize the pattern in time to act on it, or whether the gap between what its advisors are saying and what the operational record shows will compound until the table the chips were supposed to be on is no longer there to sweep them from. The drones are down, the radars are dark. The next launch will be made from a worse picture than the one that enabled this morning's launch, and it will be intercepted the same way.